Hello and welcome to this Navigating Change webinar. Today we're going to talk about going with the flow, what it means, why it's important, and also debunking some common myths. My name is Desi Jagger and I'm a certified leadership coach. I specialize in helping teams and leaders to navigate complex change, such as post-merger integration and organizational restructure.
And I'm Tanya Dasheva. I'm also a change management consultant and a coach. And my expertise lies in organizational change, behavior change, restructuring as well, as Desi mentioned. And in general, just helping organizations and individuals to reach their next maturity level, whatever that might be. Today, we're getting together for this webinar because we thought, hey, we have so much to share, so much experience and so much ideas to share around change management in the area of navigating change, something that impacts us, all of us, personally, professionally. So we decided to do this series of webinars, which basically having us in front of you combines about 20 years of experience, even maybe more, but let's not talk about it. And we've had also the pleasure to work across multiple countries, 3 continents. So we'd love to share our insights, and we hope that you will find something useful in whatever we're about to say today or in another episode.
So let's start by looking at going with the flow. Tanya, how do you define going with the flow?
For me, going with the flow has something to do with syncing, the synchronization between your goals, your ambition, and your reality. Because you know how they say life happens while you're busy making other plans. If you are stuck on that statement and you find it's very true for you, I would say that you need to work a little bit more to be in flow, because I think that if we manage to flex that muscle, to make ourselves consciously aware of what's happening around us and how that impacts our ideas for the future, being midterm or long term, we will be much more in sync with life. And it won't be like, life happens to us, but it will be, we co-create together with life what happens to us and how we interact with the events surrounding us, no matter whether we have direct control over them or that we are just in the middle of a whirlpool of changes that we are impacted, but not necessarily having the decision-making power there.
And speaking about control, I would bring a little bit of Buddhist philosophy into going with the flow, and the angle of Buddhist philosophy around non-attachment. So not clinging, not grasping to a specific idea or to a specific objective, even though it is important to have those, but not getting stuck and grasping to things and wanting them to happen at all cost. In that sense, going with the flow is about being able to navigate through different situations, aiming towards your goal, but not in a rigid way, in a more flexible, adaptive, fluid way. And if we take into consideration all of the changes that are happening in the world around us, that seems like a bit more of a natural way of being with things versus forcing them.
Yeah, listening you talk, actually, I just imagine a river, and to your point, the river never goes in a straight line, right? It just wiggles and goes around things as the flow goes, It doesn't just, okay, I'm gonna go from the shortest path to somewhere. It's the easiest or maybe the most sequential way.
Yeah. So Tanya, one of the myths that we hear often from our clients is this fear around going with the flow, meaning that they have to completely relinquish and lose control. Tell us a little bit about that myth.
I think that often people think that going with the flow would be like losing control, or is like, it's shared the idea of the river. I'm just kind of floating, right? And it takes me somewhere. But I don't think so. I'm curious also what you think, but I would say that the opposite of flow is not losing control. It's rather being stubborn, exactly as you way, being attached to what should be, to what must be, you know. And this is where often people get stuck. You know, it's like life tries to direct you to a different path, or is throwing an uncertainty in your face, but because you're so stuck and so stubborn towards your previous ambition or your goals, or maybe dreams you've had your whole life, you might just, you know, feel like I'm not in a flow. Things are happening to me instead of for me. So I think in that way, it's very important to think about how can I look into my situation from an angle of opportunity, from an angle of this is happening to offer me something better than what I expected. Because I also find as humans, we can have that arrogance a little bit. Oh, the thing that I've decided that must happen to me is the best out of all of the million options that are out there. And why is it arrogant? Because there might be better opportunity, better outcomes of a situation for you than you ever imagined. So I think going with the flow has a lot to do with staying in control to the extent you can have you always have control over yourself, or your own reaction to the uncertainties, to the change that is coming your way, to how you react to it. But always keep being mindful that you must not be stuck. You must not be stubborn when unexpected or bigger changes, especially if you're in a leadership position. You need to be that modeling that behavior of openness to the new things that are coming.
Yeah, and if we think about one of the biggest struggles that we see with leaders is they feel out of control when in fact, and they want to regain control, when in fact it's more helpful to think about taking charge. So taking control means often micromanaging. So let's say in a situation where there is big uncertainty, for example, when a company is restructuring, the leader wants to look like they're in control. They start to grasp to a lot of details. They start to micromanage to see the transition is happening according to plan. And that can create a lot of resentment, a lot of friction, and people feeling disempowered. Now, when we speak to them about going with the flow, their fear is that they're going to look like they have lost their authority, they don't know what they're doing. So instead, I invite them to think about what would it look like to take charge whilst you're going with the flow. So if you imagine, if I give another metaphor of horse riding, when you're on the horse, you are taking charge because you have the reins in your hands and you are giving clear direction to the horse. However, you cannot control the horse because that's an entirely other entity and creature with its own mind. So you need to work in synchronicity with the horse, not controlling, but taking clear charge. Going with the flow does not mean completely surrendering and kind of throwing the reins and hoping that the horse might lead you to water. That may happen, but it also may not happen. And so that's where what I find a very useful reframe to be. So rather than wanting to grasp and take control, going with the flow means how do you take charge of the situation?
Yeah, and I would give an example of a situation in I was in the middle of a big reorganization, and leadership was faced with the difficult choice. They had to let go of a whole department because of different strategy, different intentions for the business, and quite a few people were supposed to lose their jobs. And as humans, we get, it's difficult. As a leader, it's extremely difficult to make such a decision, yet also to deliver it. And to afterwards, I would say, also manage the organization after such a loss, let's say. luckily the leadership that I worked with, they were open to new ideas, to different suggestions, because you can be you know, sort of, we have to do that, so you're stuck within your mind to, this is what we need to do to cut this department, and therefore, yeah, bad luck, people will lose their jobs. But the opposite, if that is what, how can I see that from the opportunity perspective? How can I see that from taking responsibility of the outcome of that change? And one led to another. At the end, we managed to find, we spoke to the different people, and we managed to, with the leadership support, to place them in different roles. And what was very interesting is that for two people, they actually created new roles by understanding better the knowledge and expertise they bring, and understanding their ambition, but also how, they can support and add value to the new state of the organization, of the organization. That, however, requires a little bit more effort. So maybe staying within the flow also means a little bit more effort in looking for these opportunities, in doing the research, in talking to people, than just be like in the big ivory tower. Oh, 20 people gone. Well, life happens, that also brings a lot of credibility to you as leaders, to your company as a people-oriented company, because at the end, the only competitive advantage is the people you have, the expertise you carry in your organization.
Yeah, that's a great example. And if we think about going with the flow, and the flow being something very natural, as you talked about the river is naturally flowing in a certain direction. In that sense, fighting the flow is like fighting reality, not acknowledging reality. And fighting and arguing against reality is futile. What is much more effective is working with reality. So for example, if you are in the river, if you try to go against the river flow and fight and deny the river flow, that's a lot of hardship. Right. And it's a lot of effort, and I would wonder whether that's sustainable in the long term. How long are you going to be able to swim against the river and thrive and have good continuous results, versus going with the river flow, even if it's stormy, even if there's rapids, but finding smart ways to navigate that. So to give an example, I had a client that had announced a merger by a company with a very different and rather stricter, let's say, culture. So the company that was being taken over, the acquired company, people were very worried and about what was going to happen, of course, to their jobs, but also what was going to happen to the fun and lighthearted culture that they had. And so a lot of the team spent much time fighting the merger. Now, this was something that was agreed on a global level, and it was not going to be overturned. And so a lot of effort went into trying to reconvince senior management that this wasn't right, then into complaining. And of course, that's a natural reaction at first. But the longer that we spend fighting reality, the more energy that we drain and the less energy that we have to actually operate effectively day to day and to plan for our future. And so my work there with those teams was around accepting at first the reality. It doesn't mean that they had to, excuse me, enjoy the reality or love the reality, but how could they at first accept it? And then progressing on to working with the reality, working with the flow. The company was going in a specific direction with the merger. And so once the teams began to move in that direction and having embraced the facts, they started to find small opportunities, like you said, of what can be done better. How can my job be more effective? How can I have a better work-life balance? How can we as a team be more productive? And things started to be more flowing, and the discussions they were entering and the negotiations that they were entering into with senior management were more meaningful, because they were not going against reality and against the facts of the merger itself.
Yeah. And I honestly think fighting is a lonely endeavor. usually when we fight, we are in a solo position, you know. It's like I often say, don't be an anti-silo, have an anti-silo attitude, because when you fight, usually you're alone. Even if you're together with a lot of other people in a fight, everybody's on their own. Working with reality means that let's find a way together. Let's collaborate, let's discuss. So especially as leaders, I would say, if you find yourself in that state of fighting, in that state of resistance, be mindful that this is your own perspective, right? This is the reality that is only in your head. You only see a side of what is actually out there for everybody else. So I, always, working with means that connect with others, connect with your team, with colleagues, with peers, with your mentor. Take a more holistic view about the situation, and explore opportunities with others, because that puts you in the stronger state of looking for opportunities, but also in the stronger state of being, in a way, taking charge of whatever is happening. You take charge, you take responsibility. You're like, I might not like it, but I'll make the best of it. I would say that should be, to staying in the flow, being in the flow, is rather having that mindset. I'm taking responsibility of what's happening, even though I might not like it, but I'll make the best out of it.
Yeah. And as you talk about taking charge of where things are going, the direction, the vision, this brings to mind another common myth that we hear a lot, which is that going with the flow precludes me from having a vision and doing any planning. Can you speak to that?
I think it's about being conscious of it. Flow, if we take that river example, which came super spontaneously, the river has a direction, has destination, but it doesn't necessarily go straight line to it, right? Same thing with planning and visioning in organizations. Going with the flow is more like, okay, this is where we want to go, but maybe we take left here instead of right, because on the right side we see a wall or we see a jungle, meaning that maybe it's very difficult to create alignment. Maybe there's a lot of organizational turmoil on the right side. So maybe you take a detour, but you're staying with the flow, you're progressing, because also being in the flow means that you find progress on continuous basis. So the vision and planning can go hand in hand with flow. Actually, staying consciously in the flow means that you are in charge of your situation, as we said earlier, and that ultimately means that you have a plan. It's just you're more flexible in looking into that plan. Not that to get there I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, but maybe to get there I will do 1, 3, then come back, do 2, and then we go to 4. Not necessarily looking at from like a strict and must happen like that perspective.
Yeah. As you're talking, the word that's coming to mind is replanning. So having your vision as you talked here, the focal point for where you're heading, like the north of the compass, and then planning and replanning, because a plan is not fixed. A plan is a means to an end.
Yeah.
And when we see that this plan isn't working, right? So how are we going to integrate these two companies? We start to see that the plan isn't working. People aren't following it. We can try and enforce that, or we can also start to look at what are perhaps other ways to get people to integrate, right? If they're not naturally integrating, what can we create? Is it something outside of work that we need to do, or some sort of team events or bonding, or other sort of things to help people to integrate and to get to that final vision? But going with the flow absolutely does not mean jumping into the river and having no idea where this river goes and hoping that you're going to be spat out at sea one day. This absolutely is not it is not the idea. It is not about not taking responsibility or accountability, but it is about planning, replanning, and it's a continuous. I think here the emphasis is on the continuity and the constant reassessment of where are we, what is happening, is this still the right vision, are we heading roughly towards our vision? I think the issue is when you go completely against, but you may go sideways in order to get to the vision.
Absolutely. And if I can just add to that, I think one of the biggest challenges for organizations where you might feel that you're out of the flow is actually when a big change of strategic direction happens. Because then, there's a group of people that is like, actually 2030, we want to be somewhere different than where we thought 2030 will be in 2020. So that might create some kind of a bubble, a period of bubble between announcing the new strategy, like designing the new strategy, announcing the new strategy, and then kind of cascading it down through the organization. But there are also ways in that process to stay in the flow. And again, being in control also means to allow people to understand what's happening behind closed doors, and sometimes be transparent. It's like, hey, team, we're working on something big. Keep on doing what you're doing, but also be mindful that some things will change, and even sometimes give small indications of that, because at the end, you cannot just, no organization nowadays can afford to just stop production and do nothing for 3 months to redesign everything and then start again. Work needs to continue, success needs to continue in order to, be basically a working organization, yet change dynamic environments required companies to adapt and change on a regular basis nowadays.
Yeah, and we've gone into our it's a good summary of our fourth and final takeaway, which is that going with the flow is about continuously redefining success. So as you talked about, this is the vision that I have for 10 years from now, that we have as a team. But 5 years from now, is that vision still relevant? So yeah. I think that was a perfect wrap of the final points. I know that you have prepared and written a poem.
Yeah, actually, this is that's something that is old, but I think it fits perfectly well with the current topic we have. I sometimes write poems. It's a childhood hobby of mine. And in 2020, I wrote the poem Flow just before the global pandemic happened. And it goes like this. I hope it resonates with you as well. The more you hold on to, the more it slips away. The more you take for granted, the more it disappears. The more you wait, the less it matters. The more you expect, the less you enjoy. The more you think, the less you know. The more you focus, the less you see. You can write it down, you test it. I'm curious to hear any feedback on that. But it's something that resonates a lot, I think, when it comes to change. So just, sometimes we need to trust the process and trust ourselves that we'll do the best out of it.
I love this poem. And in summary of today's sessions, I would like to recap the 4 key things that we would like you to take away. Number 1, going with the flow is not about totally relinquishing control. Number 2, fighting the flow and fighting reality is futile. Working with reality and the flow is effective. Number 3, going with the flow does not mean abandoning your vision and planning. And number 4, going with the flow is about continuously redefining what success looks like. We hope that you have enjoyed this webinar.
Desi, you forgot to mention celebrations.
Yes, we always like to celebrate. So when you look at going with the flow, what's important is, as you adjust and grow, always to stop and give credit to what you have achieved as well. So with that, I'm going to give credit to our first webinar. Thank you for being here. If you would like to subscribe to this, please message us on LinkedIn, and we're going to share the details for how to do that. Thanks, and see you next time.